beyond the portal to other dimensions, after the pissed facade. My Applebaum, nominalist keeper of other dimensions, was clearly visible. I thought immediately, what would Maya do in my position? And I plainly read her lips, as she seemed to be amused, reading aloud a seven-dimensional hypercube book. Maya said, "Bite it." The gathering battle storm on the hills of Subductor was emerging. Ghostly, threatening shapes, full, filling, ominous potentials of evil, violence subtly increased their sense and sensibility, becoming and being cadres actualizing evil from nowhere. Utopia, war for others, with assured victory and profit in distant, meaningless places for the principle of power, emerged as an inertial presence, as the imminence of hyperdimensional corporate war forms actualized in the four-dimensional materiality. If life had existed of a meaningful kind on Subductor, besides me, it would likely have become concerned as the dreaded grisly visage horrifying the challenged land for which they began to hover, repealed by the combined effects of weaklons and leptons enslaved for the sole purpose of repelling. The arrival of corporate evil made me think of a song, an orange sherbet from an extraplanetary supply ship, so I sought to further understand why existential self-analysis could be an explanation for the deletion of dangerous counterfactual reference, emergent consequent to one's own actions or inaction. Philosophy and language development must cohere within a given objective universe of forces and forms existing prior to human and most other forms of sentient cognition of it. The discovery of the pre-existing abstract forms of forms supporting experience interacting with human cognition imposes a conformal logic, a potential philosophical structure regarding the correct interpretation of nature. Language forms, too, are not simply derivatives of social relationships, but are rather compound products of development in meanings, terms, and reference criteria intersocially, and also a potential orders of form capable of accurately describing nature and objects. I wondered, therefore, to what extent changing of universal dimensional criterion or existential paradigms through extra-dimensional space-time travel would alter the accuracy, form, or flow of language meanings and philosophical content. When I journeyed through dimensionally non-contingent methods of being and becoming, would my ideas and abilities to interact with experience encountered retain the quantification and quality standards of this present universe? Would the very transition from a conformal physical condition created as a reciprocal of being within a normative physical field render my existential awareness to a condition of non-cognizance? Would my state of body and mind change so far as to be incapable of discerning qualitative difference between good and evil, test criteria for the categorical imperative, or turn my feet into tree roots in a pestilential swamp? Thousands of zip-zap field operatives of doom had nearly completed local actualization in the most prime and defensible attack positions surrounding McClune's stony head. Tremendous groans from the ground of Subductor ran out as heavier than lead concentrations of compact mass armor and field compaction equipment arrived through infraspace. Without a living Subductor political operative to admit to the corporate force, the probable zip-zap fire mission would be compact into minimal area, the mass of the sector around the pissed portal and concentrated more densely than that of a white dwarf star, with an area inadequate to create a black hole and lose the opportunity to capture sentient targets for interrogation and torture. It would let information and forms be reassembled from its quantum state reduction. I've always believed, perhaps without adequate grounds, that the zip-zap crew's motivation for torture, entirely coinciding with the corporate will to extract all intellectual and financial capital, were motivated as well for the purely sadistic pleasure of creating existential nightmares without end for their victims. I would need to extricate myself from their power fairly soon before it increased. They had thus far reduced my potential tensors of egress from this four-dimensional coordinate significantly. In situations like this, the realization occurs that what had been a fairly usual situation continues to transition into the extreme. Once I had sought to make an analogy for the development schedule of this progress, so I thought it was as if I were standing about minding my own affairs while someone commenced to insert a plank beneath my feet. Then they began to profit from the sale and placement of plank extensions. It would thus happen that in this daydream at the edge, while I was conversing with a friend or contemplating sundry philosophical affairs, I would begin moving farther and farther beyond the edge upon some perfidious plank quite innocently. Perhaps after some interval and some appreciable increase of danger, I would notice that I was far beyond the edge of stability, and a plank construction team in the distance was busily buying and installing planks for profit. In what way did such environmental determinism respond to my free will and indeterminate desires? Having had enough of the battlestorm tensor threatening to break, I stepped inside the extra-dimensional shelter of the portal of piss that closed abruptly behind me like a powerful river flowing horizontally. To the forces of the battlestorm beyond, the closure of the extra-dimensional extrusion may have seemed frustrating, for I left my demolition card at the threshold, eliminating the hyperdimensional address to what lay beyond. It must have closed like an anus extruding a large field of gas before collapse. In the Earth time period of the 1950s and 1960s Christian era, a Cold War political battle between two hemispheres of the planet raged like a virus, infecting human social progress, adversely diverting resources into war material. One side waged totalitarianism in support of the masses, who would have no rights of dissent, while the other supported political freedom for the masses to enable concentrating wealth and power for the rich. Initially, they believed they were defending individual freedom and enterprise. One presidential assassin named Lee Harvey Oswald was a United States Marine, an intelligence and language specialist who served the cause of popular domination by the rich, yet who at the height of the Cold War seemed to defect temporarily to the side of totalitarian domination of the populace by an elite in order that the masses might be protected from oppression by the rich overseas. Lee Harvey Oswald's personally ambiguous mission to Moscow drew the attention of the state security force of the Soviet era in the Soviet Union, known as the KGB. He was taken into captivity and given advanced, for the time, neuropsychogenic programming, enabling him to have the right subconscious suggestions to move him toward fulfilling a desire to kill John F. Kennedy, the American president of inherited wealth. The involuntary psychological conditioning of Oswald by the KGB was one of the deepest and most closely guarded secrets of the third directorate of the former Soviet Union. It was eventually the reason for the untimely death of a former Soviet premier, one Yuri Andropov. Records of the training of Oswald were eliminated from KGB archives. Even in the post-Cold War era, no trace of programming of the Kennedy assassination team from Syria were to emerge, but I saw it all in a hyperdimensional holographic history mem as I waited, stuck for a few minutes inside the entrance to other universes. For some reason, my Applebaum liked old history videos. She had also placed the historically corresponding events of the real secret history of Procopius and others on flat dimension inward recursion symmetry breaking screens. Standing here in the anteroom of N Dimensions, watching dubiously accurate historical videos, I have occasion to consider more of the meanings of language and of language symbols. Humanity, after all, had its huge watershed divide moment with the invention of written language, when it became possible to capture meanings for later use in frozen or ossified symbols. Language used before the invention of writing may have been more restricted to live behavioral meaning or mimicking of language using behavior in practice during the language learning phase. That would be a naturalist era of language use. Perhaps there was no realistic or deterministic element to language development or use a couple of 100,000 years ago in the earliest era of the existence of Homo sapiens.